Alrighty, hello everybody and welcome back to another Fossil Creek class. My name is Jackson. I am the retail manager here at the store, and today we are going to be talking about a little bit of houseplant, indoor plant, tropical plant care, as of course we're moving more towards winter. So, to start here, it is important to know that as the seasons change, your care is going to change as well. And this isn't just for outside plants. Of course, I mean, that's obvious. More heat, sometimes you need to add more water. Or when we get into winter, I had a whole class about essentially the plant care moving into winter and frost protection. But today we're going to really specifically talk about indoor plants. Now, I say indoor plants and house plants, but a lot of people will have some of their tropical plants in annual arrangements or outside during the season, just to add some color, add some texture, some character to your own landscape, and really make things look really nice. So, it is important to know what plants you can bring in or outside. It is also important to know how to care for them and what's going to change, what you need to do to keep your plants happy, healthy, and pest-free throughout the entirety of the winter. So to start, a lot of you may have seen my citrus class that I made the other day, and that is a great class because I kind of touched a bit about keeping a plant outside during the growing season and bringing it back in. And now one of the big things to realize is that even though you have a plant outside during the growing season, if it's going to get hit by frost, if it's a tropical or subtropical plant, it's going to need to come inside. It cannot handle those temperatures. For short periods of time, it can actually be a way to control pests. Say that you have a citrus that is full of aphids or mealy or something like that. You could leave it actually outside in cold temperatures for a couple hours for a little bit to really clean it off and kill some of those insects, but you also run the risk of freezing your plant too. So you can be careful. But let us use these I have a bunch of examples here that I'm going to start pulling up to the screen. But let us start with some of the annuals. That's a good way to start. And this could be anything from herbs like this basil here all the way up to things like tea plants or cordylines, which are much more upright like this and have long cascading, very lanceolate leaves. And alocasias, colocaceas, elephant ears. Those are two of the most commonly used, very standout, and the thrillers, let's say, of your annual baskets and some of your arrangements throughout the summer. Now, a lot of things that, or a lot of plants that go into these arrangements come from tubers, so they also have the potential to be taken care of throughout the winter too, but we'll talk about those tea plants, the cordylines, and the elephant ears first. Same thing with banana. Banana actually can also do this too. But let's say that we have this elephant ear here in a nice big annual hang basket. It's the middle, it's the front display. You have a bunch of petunias or lobelia or some other very herbaceous and consistently flowering annual in front of those, or you have something spilling out like a vinca or a lysimachia, something that's adding some color and spilling out of the pot. Well, really, the only thing you're going to be able to keep out of this arrangement, and you may even want to keep, are going to be that big thriller, that big standing plant in the back or middle of your annual basket. Now, for something like an elephant ear here, it's important to know that you're still going to be able to keep it alive, you're still going to be able to water it frequently and fertilize it and keep it happy throughout the winter, but you need to make sure that you're doing it in a effective way. And that is because outside conditions, of course, are dramatically different than inside. Outside, we have a lot more sun, direct sun. It's not impeded by any windows or structures. Excuse me. It is also getting a lot of airflow. It's also getting precipitation and a bunch of other things. So, to take something like this elephant ear that's been outside in a hanging basket with all of those conditions and bring it inside is essentially to take your plant into a completely different environment. It's like bringing it somewhere completely new. And what you're going to have to do is kind of a couple different things. So, first, you're going to need to water your plants a lot less. Anything that has been outside and drying out frequently, being in the heat, being in the sun, being in the wind, once you bring it into a forced air and lower light environment, lower humidity as well, it's going to be crucial that you do not overwater things. And now, like with any of the advice that I have been giving in these classes, for everything, make sure you are sticking a finger in the soil about 1 to 2 knuckles deep. If it is wet, do not water it. It is fine. If it's dry, give it a good drink. Now that is the perfect way to water something you've brought inside. You will notice that you're going to be watering it substantially less than you were in the past, at least when it was outside, due to all those conditions changing. The other thing that's going to be important is when a plant is outside, it will get a natural precipitation as well as wind flow that is cleaning off the leaves. Now, I brought this plant out because it's a great example of something that has a lot of leaf surface area, and outside, again, would be great to not have to worry about a whole lot because, you might be hosing off the leaves and you're watering it, or you, again, might be getting natural precipitation, or there's other beneficial insects eating little mites on here, or even some of the wind flow is knocking some of that stuff off. But once you bring something like this inside, a lot of that ceases. There's no beneficial insects that are attacking any mite or any insect that's on the plant. There's not a whole lot of airflow, which is cleaning off leaves and blowing things around. And you're not getting a lot of topical water on the leaves themselves because more than likely you're going to be watering them through the soil. So on top of watering much less than you would, and of course checking that water, you're also going to want to clean off the leaves fairly regularly, at least for the first couple weeks to month that you do bring it inside. And again, that's because inside we do have that forced air, a lot of particulate in the air, and there's a lot of dust that can accumulate, and it can accumulate right on the leaves. And that hurts the plant in a couple different ways. Number one, the more obstruction there is to the leaf surface from sunlight, of course, the less photosynthesis will occur, and that will drastically kind of diminish how much energy this plant is producing. The other thing that happens is when there's a stagnant airflow, or there is like a stagnant just particulate buildup on the leaves, it stresses out the plant and gives insects like mites and spider mites a really, really good opportunity to start attacking the plant. And now again, I brought this elephant ear out for that exact reason. Spider mites love elephant ears, and they love the big surface area. They love how the surface is hydrophobic. Water does not collect on it or spread, it beads off. So you do want to make sure that when you bring a plant like this inside, you are watering the leaves and cleaning off the leaves as well as the root system itself. And that's going to eliminate any debris, any dirt, any insects, anything from accumulating in your home after you bring it inside. That's again, this elephant ear, great example of that. You will notice if you have mites or spider mites for a couple reasons. On the leaf itself, you're going to notice what we call marbling. And essentially, it is these little dots, and actually, there might be a good example on here. There are little dots that are preventing the leaf from being a full green. You might notice those little dots on a couple different places if I can move this leaf correctly. The other thing is some mites and spider mites will start to develop webbing. Now this plant has been outside and does not have much marbling on it. We've been taking good care of it, but it is something to keep in mind. A little bit of webbing, a little bit of marbling, just kind of a speckling of not necessarily green, but a white to yellow, as well as the full yellowing of the plant leaf if it does get bad enough. So make sure that you're watering a little bit less, but when you do water and you're checking that water, also wash off and clean off the leaves, so you're essentially sterilizing the plant for inside. Now that's annual hanging baskets. That's your big, massive thriller, the tallest part of it. Going to be very important. And you could use that same method with, like I said, cordylines, tea plants, bananas, if any of those are outside, citrus even. If any of those are outside, do that process. Water a little bit less, check the water, and make sure you're cleaning off the leaves, not just once, but a couple times, especially for the first couple weeks to month you bring it in. Now tea plants usually have purple leaves, but they'll look more like this with those big lanceolate leaves that kind of fall down and of course can get bigger. And now elephant ears, bananas, citrus, tea plants, cordylines, all of those that I've been mentioning are sold as houseplants as well as big thrillers in your annual display. But when you're bringing those in, again, finally, less water, make sure you're checking that. Also, make sure that you're cleaning off those leaves to eliminate any dust, debris, spider mites, anything that could have caught on that is no longer going to be taken care of by our native and outside biological controls. And make sure that you're giving them as much light as possible. Now, as important as water is and cleaning off those leaves to prevent insect issues, you do want to be giving plants you're bringing inside the most amount of light you can. Now that's because they've been outside. They've been exposed to direct, unimpeded light for the past couple months, and once you bring those in, you're eliminating quite a bit of the exposure they once had. So, if you are bringing some of this stuff in, make sure that at least for the first couple weeks a month, the same amount of time you're cleaning off those leaves, you keep it as close to a window to as much light as possible. Because even windows will fracture the light to some degree and not let as much penetrate towards the leaf. So, a couple things to keep in mind overall, and then for those big plants. Herbs are very similar. Things like thyme or basil or some parsleys can all be grown inside, and actually we do have a wonderful little herb class about all that. But say that you've been growing basil outside either in a pot or you've been growing it in a bed and you want to bring it inside and continue to eat throughout or use it for culinary purposes or what have you for the next couple months throughout the winter. You absolutely can. And I would still give the same advice. As much light as possible, especially with herbs. Herbs are going to need a lot of light. As much light as possible. Make sure that you're pinching off blooms as they occur. Blooms on herbs can typically upset the taste and the content of what you're trying to get itself. And you're also going to need to do that watering trick. Herbs can be a little bit more vigorous and a little bit easier to adapt to the inside, but still make sure that you're letting things dry out in between waterings to effectively give it a nice new home to acclimate into. If you keep watering like you were before when it was outside, you will rot the plant because it will not be as active and the plant's metabolism will not be as, let's say, aggressive as it was outside. But same story there. Make sure you're cleaning everything off, clean those leaves off, wait before waterings, give it as much light as you can. Fantastic. Next couple things I want to talk about are just general houseplants. I mean, a lot of people, if you live in an apartment or you have an outside patio and you've been bringing your other houseplants out, same thing. Absolutely the same thing. As much light, clean off those leaves, make sure it's dry before you water again, and of course, be attentive. That's going to be the biggest key to any of this. If you're attentive to that plant, it will tell you. If it's staying wet and it's starting to look bad, you might be overwatering it. And that's, completely natural. That only makes sense. It's hard to change your habits, especially if you've been taking care of that plant for a while outside, but it is just going to be important. And now I would like to talk a little bit about, I had mentioned some of those kind of annual hanging baskets, or not hanging baskets, but arrangements earlier in the season. There are some plants that you can take out or take the tuber bulb out and use as houseplants. A good example are tuberous or waxy begonias. Both of those are going to be able to be upplanted. Essentially, you can cut the plant down if you have it in this arrangement, dig out the little bulb that's in there, and then replant that somewhere inside. Now, if you're starting like that from, say, a sweet potato vine or a begonia, what you can do is essentially once you cut that plant down and you just take the bulb out, you're forcing it to be dormant. If you wake that plant back up inside, you still want to make sure, of course, it's drying out between waterings and you're giving it a decent amount of light, but you don't have to give it as much light, and you have to be a little bit less careful with watering, because once it forces it into dormancy, it's waking up in a new location. It's not already awake and moving inside, it's now asleep and have been moved inside. So you can alter some of your care as far as that's concerned. And like I mentioned, begonias are a good example. Sweet potato vine's a good example. Cannas or callas are another good example of that as well. Let's see. I'm trying to think of some other ones. Lilies are ones that you can kind of force into dormancy and wake up next year, but just a couple examples as far as that's concerned. And then kind of finally touching on the last bit of topic here, a lot of people will be buying houseplants in the winter. And just like with the rest of everything I've showed you, if you go to a nursery or garden center and you buy a houseplant in the winter and say you repot it, same things apply. You want to make sure water is going to be important. You also want to make sure you're giving it a little bit more light when you bring it home. And that's because if you buy a plant from a garden center or a nursery, it's been grown pretty much its entire life in a greenhouse. Now, the difference between plants that are grown in a greenhouse or out for sale kind of in the store, or if somebody's selling cuttings from their home, is that, again, environmental conditions are completely different. In a greenhouse, the humidity is always up, the temperature is controlled, it's getting consistent water, the way greenhouses are structured and shaped, it's also getting a ton of light. So taking a plant that's grown in that kind of setting and bringing it home, you want to be careful for the first couple weeks that you're, again, letting it dry out in between those waterings, giving it a little bit more light than you think it might need just because you have been taking it out of that high light environment. And if you are repotting it, definitely make sure you're not repotting it too much. Say you have a 4-inch, this is a poinsettia here, we do have some of these in the nursery right now. Say you take a 4-inch plant that you bought at a garden center and you want to up pot it because, well, you just bought a new plant, it's exciting. What I would do is pot it into 1 inch larger pot. This is a 6-inch pot. 4 inches, 1 inch on each side gives you a 6-inch pot. So this into that, and then you can take your 6-inch pot, put it to an 8-inch pot, so on and so forth. So on top of making sure you're letting it dry out, you also really want to allow it to not be up potted too much. That's a very quick way to rot roots. So yeah. I mean, if you're taking something inside and outside, just be careful. Make sure you're cleaning things off. Make sure that if you are bringing it inside, give it a lot of light. If it's something that doesn't need a ton of dryness, it prefers humidity, make sure that you're aware of where you're putting your plant, especially if it's next to any forced air or heating vents. Definitely want to make sure that you're giving it all the care and you're observing exactly where you're putting it. Also, if you are putting it up next to a window, make sure your windows are closed. You don't want the cold air to come in and burn some of these leaves. But overall, that is kind of the deal with this. Anything outside to inside is a brand new environment, and you're going to need to change your cultural habits based on that. You can't expect something that's been growing outside to come inside and be taken care of the exact same way. It will need less water. It's not getting as much light. You're going to have to give it as much light. Bring it over to a window. Clean off those leaves. Make sure that they are free of debris, free of insects, and the surface is completely clear of anything that could impede photosynthesis. And of course, if it's something edible, make sure you're pinching off some of those flowers for those herbs because it will disrupt the taste to some degree. And then we talked about the new plants. If you're bringing or buying new plants from a garden center, make sure that you're doing those same practices because it is a different environment. Got a comment down here. We have had trouble with bringing fungus flies in. What do you use to keep them at bay? That is a fantastic question. The fungus gnats, the fruit flies, a lot of people call them the same thing. Sometimes they're different. That is another thing that naturally, if you have a plant outside, is controlled by the environment and different insects and biological controls. When you bring it inside, it's stagnant and the water stays wetter for longer. Fungus is allowed to grow more easily in that wet soil. And of course the fungus flies will eat the mycelium that's part of it. There's a couple ways to deal with that. Number one, Make sure your plants are drying out a little bit more in between waterings, because the wetter the soil is, the better it can facilitate fungal growth. The other things you could do are buy sticky traps. Sticky traps will catch the adult flies while the eggs remain in the pot. The next thing you can do is purchase mosquito bits. Mosquito bits is a great product, which honestly I should have brought over here with me. But it's essentially a granular with a bacteria called Bt in it that you pour onto the top of the soil, water that in, and essentially will kill off the eggs. The bacteria in there will kill off the eggs. Thank you very much. Mosquito bits. It's very good for mosquitoes as well, but is also labeled for those fungus gnats or fruit flies. So you just pour a little bit of this in the top of your pot. It will tell you how much in the instructions. Water that in, and your sticky traps should take care of the adults. The mosquito bits should take care of the eggs. Letting it dry out also prevents any more fungus from going. So you're doing a multi-step approach to dealing with this. It is not just a one and done type thing. So that is the best way to get rid of some of those fruit flies. Of course, no problem at all. Thank you. But that is a great question, because I have quite a few people come in and mention that. So thank you for bringing that up as a very good point. But yeah, I'm pretty much getting over to the point where I've said what I wanted to say about bringing these things in as far as care and cultural aspects. Does anybody have any questions about what I have mentioned, or what they're experiencing? Any specific anecdotes anybody would like to share? Anecdotes? And if not, I think what I'm going to do, guys, is head on out. Thank you for being a part of the class and great participation and questions here. If anybody has any more questions regarding this matter, you can always reach out to us, and we'd be happy to answer, either at the store or through our website and on social media as well. So if that's going to be it, then thank you, everybody.